Hello and welcome to Art Minutes. I'm Patricia Tomlinson, curator at the Appleton Museum of Art. Today I want to talk about a painting from our permanent collection that is also part of a broader movement, which I will get to in a moment. The painting's title is Matin, which is French for morning, and it was painted by Pierre-Étienne-Théodore Rousseau. Rousseau was considered one of the leaders in a particular art movement that was later dubbed the Barbizon school. It was named this because the artists would often lodge in the small town of Barbizon, which was just on the outskirts of the forest of Fontainebleau, outside of Paris. This particular forest traditionally had been the private hunting area for the kings of France. So they would go and they would have hunting parties there. No one else was allowed to be in there or hunt. But over time, of course, and especially after the French Revolution, it became a forest that everyone could access. And these painters began doing this. They began painting out in the open air. Now, before I go any further in this concept, I want to talk about how revolutionary this was. Traditionally, with the French Academy and the very stringent, specific way that artists were trained at this time, by concentrating on classic themes such as Greco-Roman gods and goddesses, and other stories from history, things like that. And landscapes, if they were ever shown at all, were completely relegated to background. So landscapes, as we know them in our current era, were really not painted. They were background information. And that is why the Barbizon School was so phenomenally groundbreaking for its time, because these artists were actually going out in the open air, lugging their canvases and their easels and everything out into the open air and painting the landscapes that they saw before them. That had never been done before. If any landscapes were produced as background information, usually people would go out and sketch and then take those sketches back home to their studios and paint those background information indoors in their studios, not out in the open air. And this is why often the Barbizon School, in part, is considered to have laid the groundwork for the Impressionist movement that was to come. In addition, when we look closely at this painting and some of the details, we see that in addition to cows under a tree, we can notice the very loose brush strokes, the very ease of which the paint is moved around the canvas, and that also is considered to have laid the groundwork for that very loose impressionistic style that was to come. One of the things I think is the most delightful about the Barbizon movement is how very much these men, and they were all men, truly enjoyed painting out in the open air. One of Rousseau's acolytes, Narcisse de la Peña, talks about how they would go out and become possessed by the beauty of the forest. And they would often pack a lunch and spend the entire day out in the forest, painting what they saw, enjoying nature, which I think is a really wonderful thing. The Barbizon School was also made up of individuals from all walks of life. Some of these painters were well off, some of them were very poor, some of them were older, some of them were quite young. So it was this really interesting movement that crossed age boundaries, crossed class boundaries, and brought all of these painters together to really appreciate the beauty of nature. So when you look at a landscape that perhaps hangs in your home, you can thank Pierre Rousseau and his fellow Barbizon School painters for allowing this concept to become societally acceptable. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to sharing more Art Minutes with you soon. Make sure you follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.